Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Toronto Real Estate Show with Jenelle and Leslie. I'm Jenelle Cameron.
Hi there, I'm Leslie Pearson.
And today we're going to talk all about investment properties. Hey, everybody, welcome back. Hope you had a great week. Thanks so much for tuning in. And we're happy you're here. How was your week, Leslie?
Uneventful, personally, but my anecdotal understanding of what's going on in the marketplace is it was probably a slower than other weeks because it was March break.
Mm-hmm.
So typically, quite often at least, sellers decide not to come out or take offers that week, and I think we found that.
Yeah.
But this week, I have already found a lot more coming out. So
Yeah,
busy now.
definitely a lot more listings on the market.
Yeah.
I don't find maybe as much what's the word I'm looking for? Action on some places. Some have been busy. Some I think what I'm saying is I've seen a lot of properties not sell on offer day.
Yeah, I've seen a little bit of that.
More than I was kind of
So
thinking
what do
would
you put that down
happen.
to?
I don't know. I think because we were kind of seeing that a couple of weeks ago that they were lots of offers and selling on offer day. Now, not as much. So,
I've seen a couple that didn't sell on offer date, and in each case, my perspective was that the asking price was too high.
mm-hmm.
And I think maybe there's a little bit of sellers having unrealistic expectations either of the process
Yes.
or, value. I don't know. But in
Yes.
one case in particular, I think it would have gone crazy if it were listed 100,000 less.
Mm-hmm.
They would have gotten way more than what they're asking now. But
Well, and that's the key, isn't it? I
yeah,
mean, we talked about this last week if you followed along about multiple offers and setting up for multiple offers.
hmm
One of the things you really have to do as a seller is make sure that you are listed low enough that it scares you.
right. So I think that maybe the few stories I know of, I
Mm-hmm.
think that's the case.
Could be.
I don't know. Maybe just it's a March break reason. I don't know.
Yeah, it could be. I think people are just kind of jumping back in the fold a little
Yeah.
bit.
hmm
Um, yeah, I found a couple of my listings have been slower.
Yeah. I was going to ask,
Yeah,
how is that great place doing?
slow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't get it.
Now I've got a couple of listings coming out in the next few weeks that I think will be hot sellers. So that'll
hmm
be a really good perspective to see what that's like.
hmm
One in Mississauga, which is, not an estate sale, but definitely, the owner has gone into a facility now and the home is pretty original and it's a nice, big, beautiful property. That's the kind of house people really like.
hmm
They want to buy that, subdivide it, whatever the case may be, renovate it, sell it. I mean, you could buy that for, I don't know, like, 1.2 and do a renovation in that neighborhood where it is and probably sell it for 2.8,
hmm
So,
That's exciting.
so that's
Good for
exciting.
you.
Yeah, people like that. I've got a couple of others coming up. I have
hmm
another potential elderly person who's gone into a home sale, which is kind of, I guess that's the time of year
Maybe
we're
we should
in.
talk about that another time.
We should talk
Our
about
experience
that.
with that and some of the particularities around
Yeah.
listing a family home in a
Yeah.
time of need.
Yeah.
Yeah, we should
Yeah.
talk about that because we know a lot about that.
We do know a lot about that. And
hmm
there seems to be, I don't know about you, but we're going off topic here, but since COVID, like I feel like there's been more of that happening.
I think
It could
it's
just be
just the
the
demographics of our
I guess so.
society.
It just seems like every second home I look at online is
hmm
is a either an estate sale or a power of attorney. Um,
Well, there's a lot of people in that age bracket.
yeah, there are.
hmm
Yeah. Yeah.
hmm
Interesting.
And what is it like the most significant transfer of wealth in the history of mankind is
Now?
about to start?
Oh, is
Yeah,
that right?
yeah, and
Wow.
it's that generation,
Huh.
and that's all part of it.
I
Yeah,
don't
in the
seem to
in the
be
history of time.
a beneficiary of that that generational
No,
wealth.
no,
Damn.
me either. What did
Yeah.
we do wrong?
What did my parents do wrong? I
Born
think
into
is
the
more
wrong
the
family.
and the wrong family in the wrong cold place. Today is a miserable day. Okay, so but today we're going to turn that around by encouraging all to buy investment properties, and you will be leaving generational wealth to your children.
All right, let's get
Okay.
at it.
So I'm getting all kinds of questions all of a sudden about buying investment properties from clients of mine who are I I'm kind of surprised, but now is the time that they're thinking they want to do
So
it.
these are people who haven't done it before, like it's
That's
first
right. First
timers.
timers. Um, I had a lot of people do it a few years ago and bought a whole bunch, and good for them when they did, is they've all made a whack load of money. But now I've got people who I think have recognized in the last couple of weeks or months that prices did go down. They're going to go back up, and they want to try to get in on this, knowing that prices are probably going to go crazy when interest rates go down, and good for them. So I thought it was worth it today just to talk a little bit about investment properties, what your options are. And I know we've done this before, but I think it's worth doing again because interest rates are at a different
Mm-hmm.
place. What's required and why you should do it.
Mm-hmm. All right.
So, first of all, I think as someone who has a couple of investment properties, I think, hands down, smartest thing I've ever done. And I did it when I could. I was able to, save as the bare minimum that I
Mm.
could in order to, buy one.
Start. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it kind of kept the train going from there. Now, for most people, let's assume you already own a principal residence and you're trying to buy your first investment property.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things you want to make sure, this seems obvious, but it's important, is that you can afford to do so from a lender perspective. When you own one property and you are planning to buy another, you generally need to have 20% down. And I
Yep.
don't think a lot of people recognize that. And by the way, 20% down payment doesn't mean you can borrow the money.
Oh,
Okay,
you have
so
to have it.
you have to have that
Mm-hmm.
money. And same thing when you're buying regular
Yeah.
property, by the way. Um,
Can it be a gift?
it can be a gift,
Right.
but it has to be money
That you
that's
have.
liquid that you
Mm-hmm.
have.
Mm-hmm.
So,
So you can't get a loan out for your deposit.
right. And
Mm-hmm.
people feel,
Yeah.
I think that they can do that, but they can't. So, 20%, can be relatively significant. Obviously, it depends on where you're looking, what type of property. And if you're self employed, it might be more like 30%
Mm-hmm.
because as a self employed person, I generally have to put down 25 or 30% every time I buy one. I can't get away with 20.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's money you have to have. So, assuming you have that money and you're looking at, you've done the calculations and you're looking and saying, okay, well, I'm going to need to have, I don't know, let's just say $50,000 for, which wouldn't be much, but let's
Mm-hmm.
just say $50,000. You've got that and you've been approved, then, you can kind of start the next step. But, just keep in mind what the average home price is in the neighborhood or the city that you're looking at and
Well, that will help
calculate.
you figure out where you can buy.
That's right.
If you know you have to have your 20 to 30%, you have to then know what the total price is going to be, and that'll
Hmm.
rule out a lot of your options.
That's right. I
So that will
mean,
help you clarify your search.
yeah, and I think we'll start this by saying, like, I am a huge proponent of buying investment property outside of the city of Toronto.
Well, for that reason, right?
Yeah, and land transfer tax.
Right.
Um, you know, I think buying your principal residence in Toronto is great if you can, and if you can afford an investment property in Toronto, I think that's phenomenal. And you don't mind, you have the extra money to pay. I think that's great. But I think for a lot of people, for this discussion,
Yeah, I think the only way that Toronto makes sense is if you have so much money
yeah,
that you're covered.
you're covered.
Hmm.
But for most people, you might be looking outside the city, and there's all kinds of areas in the GTA. But you want to be looking for something where you can afford, you know, a duplex or a triplex, or even if it's a condo, whatever the case is. Look at all of your different options and kind of determine, okay, well, I can't afford anywhere too close to the city, but I can buy in Peterborough where the average price is 550,000 as opposed to, looking
Right.
at something in Toronto, which is, 1.2 million.
Right.
So there are lots of good places to buy. And the pushback I get all the time from people is that, well, I don't want to buy in Peterborough. That's way too far from where I live because I live in Toronto. And, our answer to that is you just hire a property management company to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that everybody should have property management
Mm-hmm.
companies when you're
Mm-hmm.
buying an investment property
Well,
because
you haven't. I know I shouldn't speak out of turn, but it's buying an investment property is strictly a financial decision,
that's right.
and it's possible for someone to buy an investment property without even seeing it,
Yes.
because what does it matter?
What does it matter? As
Mm-hmm.
long as
Mm-hmm.
you've got someone on the other side that you trust.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So people get hung up with needing to be close to their investment property.
Yeah. And that makes sense if you want to maintain it yourself and
Mm-hmm.
keep a hand in it. Or if you're, because I get this sometimes from people who want to buy something maybe even nicer than where they live now.
Mm-hmm.
And they eventually might want to move into it.
Oh yeah.
So they're buying it as an investment and think, yeah, I like my house now or my condo, but maybe I'll move into that later. Or they buy a condo as an investment property and they live in a house now and they think, well, I'll buy a condo because I'm eventually going to move there anyway.
Right.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So those are things I think that when it comes to location, really, you're absolutely right. It should just depend on
Well, I think your
what you can
budget is
afford.
going to determine your location.
Yeah.
The other pushback I hear is that, you know, the rental income is so much stronger in Toronto than elsewhere. And I just don't believe that's the case.
It actually
How
isn't the
can I make as
case.
much money in, I don't know, Windsor as I could here? And
Yeah. And I think you have to look at your overall monthly income or your overall, what we call a cap rate. So you're looking at all of the things combined, all your expenses, the rent you get in, what percentage are you making every month? And it's really going to depend, I think, on, where you're what type of property you're looking at. And
mhm.
we'll talk about that in a minute. But yes, I think it's all proportionate. And also you're right, because you could pay, let's say for, you know, a 3-bedroom home in Oshawa is probably going to cost going to be, $2,800 a month.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it would be $3,500 a month in
Mm-hmm.
Toronto, but it's not that much of a difference.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing I think to keep in mind about that is that, prices in the GTA all go up at the same
I was going to ask. I
rate.
was going to talk about that.
Yeah.
So that's the other thing that people say
Yeah.
is, where will price growth be the strongest?
Yeah.
That's where I want to be. It kind of has to be both a short term and a long term decision.
Yes.
Like, you want to buy somewhere where you think your property value is going to increase, and I can't think of really of a place where that wouldn't be the case, but still you
The
have to think
US.
about that. But also a place where you're going to have the kind of tenant you want,
Yeah,
paying the kind of money you want.
that's right.
So
And good tenants.
yeah,
There are definitely places where you get better tenants
yeah.
than others. But I think, yeah, all those things are combined and, you pick the property that's best for you. But I think at the end of the day, doing this or like making the steps to do this is so important because anything you buy today, wherever it is going to be worth so much more
See,
in
we're going to
5
get
years,
comments
10
about that,
years.
but
Yeah,
that's
it's the
the way we
truth.
see it.
It's
Yeah,
the truth.
yeah.
Um,
So yeah, to your point though about not being hesitant to buy something out of the city, because you can get a property manager to handle things locally for you. What kind of things does a property manager do, and how much does that cost?
so it generally costs somewhere between, I would say, 5 to 10% of the gross monthly rent. I'd say 8 is the average, 8%. And some property managers are definitely better than others, but for the most part, they will find tenants for you. And that's great because, especially if you're in a problem city or a problem area, having a property manager that knows that area really almost guarantees that you're going to be getting good tenants because they've seen all those people come through the door before.
Oh,
Like,
right. That's true too.
yes, I remember
They've
in
applied for others.
they've applied for others, and I remember in I have a place in Hamilton, which I think, by the way, is like one of the best places to buy an investment property. But tenants are tough in Hamilton. There's no question. And I remember one time getting an application and the property manager saying, "Oh, no, 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 we've kicked this guy out of several places before, so we will not be even considering his application." So that's one of the big benefits of having a property manager because, otherwise, like, because I tried to get tenants on my own in Hamilton,
Yeah, and
and
how would you know that history? You wouldn't.
that's right.
Hmm.
But if there was a database, and I digress for a second with one tenant who was the most trouble I've ever had with a tenant, I actually had to
In
have,
Hamilton?
yeah, I had to
Hmm.
have the sheriff remove
Oh.
her. There was a sheriff, like, I know that sounds crazy, but it's like the sheriff came and removed her. And when
Oh.
he came, he said, "Oh, her. Oh, yeah, I've kicked her out of at least 4 places
Oh,
before."
so sad.
So sad,
Hmm.
and sad for me,
Yeah.
not sad for her.
No, no, no.
And so, I wish there was a place that we could go to find out these people exist, but of course, privacy laws.
Hmm.
Anyway, that's a whole other story for another day. But so they do, they find tenants. If there's a problem with tenants, which sometimes there are, the property manager will be responsible for issuing all of the necessary forms to have the problem eradicated. So whether that's evicting the tenant, or that is, whatever issue they have going
Hmm.
on, the property management will take care of that. And if they need to go to tribunal at the landlord and tenant board, the property manager will assume all of that responsibility and do that necessary work too.
Hmm.
Um, and I should say that it really kind of depends also with each landlord, how involved they want to be. And you could get more involved if you want to, but there's a lot of people like myself who don't want to have any involvement. I don't want to know these people, their names. I don't want them to have my contact
So
information.
that 8% is money well spent, in your
Very
opinion.
well. Now
Hmm.
they will also do all the repairs. So if the tenant calls at 4 o'clock in the morning because their toilet doesn't work, they call the property manager, emergency line. They take care of it. You don't get involved. So they pretty much do, annual inspections or semi-annual inspections. They do everything that you would do yourself, only more, I think,
Hmm.
and take care of all the problems. So it's all that to say, it is well worth,
Hmm.
having a property manager manage your property, even if it's just one or two or whatever.
Hmm.
Yeah. Um, so now the alternative to that is maybe if you own a condo as an investment property, which, by the way, I don't is not my favorite thing to do. I think for a lot of reasons, I think it's really hard to make money on a condo because by the time you pay maintenance fees, you are not going to
That's true.
be generally in the
Yeah.
positive at the end of the
Yeah,
month.
I agree. I hadn't thought of that. I don't like condos as an investment because I guess I don't, my preference would be to buy something with more than one unit,
Yeah.
and a condo doesn't offer that.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Hmm.
Because if you have a tenant that doesn't pay you, or there's some sort of problem with the tenant, then you have no money coming in and you're
Hmm.
responsible. But if you buy a duplex or something that has 2 units or more, but let's just say a duplex, for example, somebody's always paying,
Yeah.
you know, and it's not like
Or I like
there's
a bungalow with a separate basement apartment.
it, that's
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 probably my favorite.
that's perfect.
Hmm.
Yeah. And then you've got money coming in from 2 units. It's really the only way to get a positive cash flow at the end of the
Yeah,
month.
really hard to do that with a condo.
It's really hard.
Hmm.
And instead, you get a place with 2 units. One unit, probably the lower unit, is going to be paying your expenses. And the upper unit, for a lot of people, it's going to be, just income.
Hmm.
And so it's definitely the way to go.
Hmm.
And I think for a lot of people listening to this, if they've never purchased one before, they probably won't be able to afford anything more than 2 units.
Right.
Um, and by the way, you'd be looking at, a condo in Toronto would be comparable to maybe having a house with 2 units in, say, Peterborough or
Right.
Barrie or something
Right.
like that.
Right.
So All of that has to come into consideration when you're deciding what to do. Because a lot of people want to buy condos because they don't want to have any maintenance or work required. But again, that's what your property manager is for.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so you're paying those hefty maintenance fees. It's really cutting into your income.
Your
Hmm.
income. Yeah.
Hmm.
And I think it works if it's something, say, that you want to move into over time,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Oh, and I you talked about people thinking of the future and downsizing. I know a lot of people who've bought one when their kids are small with the thought that their kids will move into it when it's time.
Yes.
There's a lot
Yes.
of that going on.
Yeah.
Um,
Which I think is, that's all great
mhm.
for
I've known a
sure.
couple of instances where that didn't work because they thought the kid would go to U of T or Ryerson and they
Yeah.
didn't. But
Me too.
regardless, they still have the condo and have rented it out for years.
Yeah,
Hmm.
exactly.
Hmm.
That's right. But yes, that happens a lot, which is
Yeah.
kind of funny.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, like just a little bit on location, some of the neighborhoods or some of the areas I would be considering if I was you and you're buying your first investment property and you can't afford to buy something in Toronto,
Yeah.
I would definitely be looking at Durham, which
Yeah.
is expensive, but Oshawa is still a really great option and good rent. Generally don't have too many issues there depending on the neighborhood, and always in high demand.
Hmm.
I would consider Hamilton.
Hmm.
I know I've mentioned Peterborough a couple times. I would consider that. I would consider Barrie, and London, Ontario, Guelph, those are good too.
These are all places, though, that I have the impression of at least that they're quite expensive.
But cheaper than Toronto,
Yeah.
And then Windsor, I have a couple of places there, and I think also a great option in Windsor. Windsor maybe has a little bit more ebb and flow than some other areas, perhaps, but I think great. I mean, I've made some good money on some places in Windsor, so I think that's also tough tenants in Windsor, though.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. Um, so that's kind of, a little bit about that. I do want to touch on, because a lot of people say they don't want trouble with tenants, and I do think it's important to touch on the differences today than maybe a couple of years ago with respect to landlord rights and tenant rights. And it's been really, really hard since COVID for landlords to get money back for non-payment or any issues because the landlord and tenant board is so backed up.
Yeah, you have to have a bit of a thick skin going into it, knowing it may not be easy.
You really do, and
And
I
it
think
seems like
it's getting worse.
sometimes it seems like all the rules and regulations are not in the landlord's favor,
They're not in the
and it's a
landlord's
little bit of a
favor.
it can be a little bit of a fight all the time.
Yeah. And it's
Hmm.
and it's tough, and I think that that's really important for everybody to hear, because back in the day, it was, you'd have the odd problem, and you would be able to solve it. But today, it's very different landscape. I think if you have tenant trouble, you're not going to see any money from that tenant until it goes through the landlord or tenant board, probably a year.
Yeah, and I don't know about you, but I have the impression that tenants are much more knowledgeable
Hmm.
about the system and the process and how to work it.
Yeah.
You hear all the time lately about cash for keys
Yeah.
and how much that's escalated in the last year or so, like
Yeah.
crazy.
Do
And
you
they
want to
just
explain what that means, just in case some people don't know?
well, essentially, the landlord or owner of the property wanting to get rid of a tenant will offer money for that tenant to leave.
Hmm.
Like, clarify if I'm wrong. And the amount that is now has gone crazy. So
Outrageous.
essentially, tenants are holding landlords kind of hostage
Yeah.
and not really giving them any option. Um,
And this, by the way, is even if the tenant's not paying.
yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. And it used to be, I don't know, I think that it used to be like you'd give a equivalent of a month's rent
Right.
or two, but now we're talking,
Yeah.
up to $100,000. I heard recently.
Yeah.
I had a tenant once ask for 50.
Yeah. I have a client whose tenant just asked for 50.
Yeah,
Yeah.
$50,000 to leave.
And they settled on 25,000. This
Mhm.
is like for an Oshawa apartment. And he said they pay $2,000 a month.
Mhm.
It's going to take me probably at least a year to
That
get
was
rid
their
of them.
logic. Oh, okay. That was the landlord's
Yeah,
logic.
he said, so I'm paying it. And he
Yeah.
did. He paid 25,000 to get rid of them. They just stopped paying.
Yeah.
And it's funny, I have a client that called me the other day, and I've helped him rent his house out. And he said, I'm anticipating having trouble with these tenants. They're giving me a really hard time. I think they're going to try to get out of the lease. How do I make them stay?
Mm.
I said, you do not make them
No,
stay.
no, this
You
is,
you say, please leave.
yeah,
I'm happy if you leave. And he's like, but I don't understand. I said, if you try to keep them there, they just will stop paying you.
yeah,
And if they stop paying you, you're not going to see that money for a long time.
yeah. And there's nothing you can do
There's
to change
nothing
that.
you can do to
Mm-hmm.
change it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not happy with the way the landlord tenant board runs. I'm actually disgusted,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't want that to discourage people, because most of the time you don't have trouble. It's really just, on
Mm-hmm.
the odd occasion. And but you have to know, you're right. You have to have thick skin. You have to know it could happen.
Yeah, I mean, not everybody is as wonderful as we are, and there are people out there to scam.
Yeah, and there seem like a lot more than there used
And
to be.
even aside from people out there to scam, there are, I ran into a tenant recently who was very knowledgeable. Oh my gosh. But she was not out to scam, but she was just out to get all that she could get. And,
Yeah.
part of me thinks, well, good for you.
Yeah, I think people don't see
That
landlords as people.
50,000 cash for keys
Yeah.
helps her buy a house.
Right.
Like, so if
Yeah.
if she does have the leverage to make that happen, kudos to her, I guess. But it's just kind of dicky.
Oh,
Those
it's
people.
gross.
That wasn't.
Um, it's horrible that you would take advantage, because I think people don't realize, like, most landlords out there, the news portrays the landlord as like these horrible people who are trying to, like, screw over the tenants and take everything they can get, and they keep showing on the news like this landlord's renting out a bunk bed for 400 a night, and like it's crazy. But I think most landlords are decent people who
Most
only have
landlords, yeah,
one or
yeah,
two
they're
properties in their,
individuals who small, investors who they're not big,
yeah, worked hard to
companies,
get there.
yeah, and they're not making a killing um, to do this.
Hmm.
Yeah, no, I think it's a very sad situation,
It is a sad
and I
situation.
think
It's
the
frustrating.
board has allowed it to happen.
Right. And I think if they don't change the way things are, there will be no more landlords, and therefore there won't be
Yeah,
any tenants
yeah,
having places to live. Like, it's such a circular problem. I mean, the way this
yeah.
the government wants to put all these restrictions on landlords and make it difficult for them. Well, do you not understand the ramifications of that? We
Mm-hmm.
will end up with no landlords.
Mm-hmm.
Like, who would subject themselves to that?
I guess that's why we've kind of seen a little bit of a growth or uptick in the building of like purpose-built apartment buildings.
Yes,
It's got
yes.
to be related
It's
because
got
we
to be
have seen a bit
related.
more of that
Yeah.
from, you know, um, not Ontario housing, but from very low rent places to very high end places.
A lot of high end
Yeah,
places. Yeah.
super places.
Yeah, really nice
That you
places.
didn't for maybe 20 years. There was no development of that kind of product.
Yes. And I
Hmm.
think that I think you're absolutely
Hmm.
right.
Hmm.
Um
So we've talked about location. We
yeah,
talked about property management. We've talked about
the type of home you could
yeah,
buy.
yeah, and we've talked about some issues to think about in deciding if you want to be a landlord.
Mhm.
Um, what else about it?
I think the concept of whether what your long-term plan is, I think, is really important. And I think it's worth mentioning that I believe that buying an investment property should be a long-term thing for you, and part of your portfolio is keeping these properties for as long as you can,
Hmm.
and ultimately doing whatever you want with them. But this is not meant to be a turnover, buy it, flip it a couple of years later. I think for most people, you're going to make your money by holding on for a long time.
That's probably true of all real estate
It's true of all
purchases.
real estate.
Hmm.
But I think, it's important to recognize, tenant troubles aside, there are going to be years of owning an investment property where you make lots of money and nothing goes wrong. And there's going to be years where you have to replace the roof and the furnace and the air
Hmm.
conditioner, and everything goes wrong in the same year.
And typically happens just when you buy it.
It always happens when you buy it. Or in my case, it seems to come in like 5-year cycles,
Uh,
and then everything happens at the same time.
right.
So I think you need to know that's going to happen. I mean, I often get tenants, you know, or landlords, I should say, buy their first property, and they're so wanting everything to be perfect, and it's like, okay, you will have to replace this roof at some time. Maybe it's a new roof today, but it won't be a new roof in 10 years from now. Or yeah, so you have to replace the furnace today. Okay, that sucks, but you won't have to do it in 15 years. Like everything about home ownership applies, but I think people go into sometimes investment owning thinking that they're going to everything they're going to start making money right off the bat, and that may be the case and it may not be.
And that's certainly something to factor into your kind of purchasing decision,
That's
your
right.
into your financial situation.
Yeah.
You have to allow for those, you know, expenses.
Yeah, you have to make sure
Hmm.
when
You've
the,
got the money for it
the
when
furnace
the furnace
breaks,
fails.
you've got,
Yeah,
$5,000 kicking around to fix it. And that's just the reality of any home ownership. So I think that's important to note.
yeah,
And I think, again, all of that shouldn't affect you too much because hopefully you have this for a really long time and you are able to, give that to your children or cash it all in and live on your off of the investment in a some sort of other type of investment. Like there's lots of options, but the idea is not to keep it for a couple of years and sell it.
yeah.
That's not how you're going to make your money.
So once you've you know your budget, you know what your budget buys you, so you know where you want to be and what kind of property, and you're out there looking. Is there any difference in the offer process of an investment property as opposed to what we're typically used to in residential purchases?
Good question. I don't think necessarily, but I do something you said before I think is worth pointing out kind of along those lines is that you have to always remember you aren't living there.
Yeah.
So if you don't like the kitchen,
Right.
it doesn't matter.
Right.
And, I think for that's really hard to kind of separate yourself when you
Hmm.
walk into a place and you're like, oh, this is horrible. You go, oh, okay, that's okay. I'm not living here. And really all that matters is the money
Hmm.
about it, right? So if it's
Everything has to be functional,
everything has to be
not
functional.
like design perfect.
No, and in fact,
Hmm.
I discourage all clients from buying something that's strictly for investment purposes, that's beautiful. I think that's a mistake. It should be average.
Hmm.
Average does not need too much work and not be beautiful because if the property is beautiful, it won't be for long.
Yeah.
Tenants don't keep the home like we keep our
Yeah.
homes, right?
Yeah, and so when you are replacing that stove, you don't go for the top of line one, you don't go
Yes.
for the bottom, but you just
Yeah.
think of who's going to be using it, what it's going to be used for,
Yeah.
and you're not putting in that stove for your use.
Yeah.
It's for someone who's paying a fair rent to be able to eat.
That's right. And so make it average. And I,
Yeah,
I think that that's fair. And I think that no tenant out there, unless they're paying huge amounts of money for
yeah,
to live there, but no tenant is expecting like the highest end marble countertops, right?
yeah,
I think most people want a nice, clean, safe place
right.
to live, and that's kind of from buying something and going through this process many times now. I think it's really important to keep that in mind. I've over time, I have had to replace almost everything. Like that's just how it works. It's
Yeah.
different.
Yeah, now, Janelle, you own several investment properties and you've helped many investment clients. One thing I've wondered about, I don't do as much as you do in this area, but if someone has figured out, has saved their 25 to 30% or whatever, and has figured out their budget and what kind of housing they're looking for, if they're starting to look, is there someone like you who would then be able to say, okay, with that budget, looking at that type of property, you should be looking in Guelph, Peterborough, and Aurelia? Or do you have to go to each of those places to find out what you can get? Like, is there one stop? Are there realtors who know the province well enough to direct people to? Because I don't know that I would feel comfortable doing that.
Yeah, I definitely would,
Yeah.
because help people do this all the time in different areas, even if I'm not the
I mean, I
one
would, but there
telling
are parts
them.
of the province I don't know.
Same, but I know about them.
Yeah.
And I think part of that was because I did coaching for real estate coaching for so many years and worked with realtors
From everywhere. Yeah.
from everywhere.
Yeah.
So I really got to know the different markets in Canada. So I feel like a good place to start, at least, is with your own realtor. Talk to them about what you're thinking, and then kind of take it from there. Like I have clients who bought in Alberta last year and they came to me first and said, like, this is what we're thinking. um, and I'm like, okay, I know a little bit about the market where they were looking into. I know a realtor in that neighborhood. called the realtor, chatted with them, put them in touch. They
Right.
bought something
So use someone you trust to maybe to get
to
you someone to
facilitate the
trust. Yeah.
process.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think just going, just shopping around, going to different places is, I don't, to find a realtor, I don't think is ever really a good
Hmm.
idea.
I wish we could turn the camera around and show people what we're looking at outside your windows.
It's horrifying.
Oh
It's like a blizzard.
my gosh, it's March 19th or
Yeah,
whatever it is this
I
week.
know.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry, I
It's getting
digress.
me down, man.
I know. We got to end this so I can stop looking at it.
Exactly. But on that note, another option is, I think for some people, is don't discount buying an investment property in a tropical location. That's a nice idea because a lot of places where you might want to consider doing that, they actually have on site property management. They can do Airbnbs, they can facilitate the entire process, and you can make a lot of money on a property. And if you just got back from Costa Rica, something like that, somewhere in Mexico, even Florida, like on in Miami or something like that, where you could be renting these places out for several $100s a night and use it when you want to. So that's also a good option.
Hmm.
I think that scares people because they don't even know where to begin with that.
Selfishly, I'd like that to be your next purchase.
I'm working on it. Except I may just leave and never come back. I
Oh,
don't know.
don't say that.
Yeah. So yeah, I think these are options. So I don't feel like people should shy away from that either. And
Hmm.
then you can avoid
Hmm.
what we're looking at right now.
Or even in Europe, I know some people who have bought in
Yes.
Europe. Hmm.
Yeah, exactly.
Hmm.
Yeah, and why not? And I don't think you should ever, if you have a dream of living somewhere or doing you going somewhere, like think about that. You may even rent here in the city of Toronto and decide to buy your first place in, you know, somewhere in Tuscany because that's where you've always wanted to own property. You can do that. There are people there that can help you
Hmm.
do that. It doesn't mean that just because it's.
Yeah, I mean that's a good point. You don't have to own to buy an investment property.
That's right.
You can rent, and especially because of the high prices in Toronto. I know a couple of people that are continuing to rent in Toronto, but see the value of buying,
Yeah,
so are buying something outside Toronto.
absolutely.
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. The only other thing I wanted to mention is from a financing perspective, you can look into refinancing your current property if you have one and taking some equity out to buy a second property. So that is something that you can do if you have enough equity and your finances are such. It is worth asking your
But you
lender
still
about
have
it.
to have that hefty deposit
You still have
or
to
the
have it, but
pump.
sometimes it can just come
Hmm.
directly from, like, it
Oh,
just, I think it depends on,
oh,
but
okay.
you have to have enough
Hmm.
equity in there for that to work. So that's something I would talk to my lender about if that's, you really want to buy a second property, especially if you live in the US. It's really easy for them. They don't have the same 20% rules. You can
And when I said
quite
20%, I think
easily
I incorrectly said deposit. It's not deposit, it's down
down
payment.
payment.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think you want to be able to look at all your options and go to your bank or your lender and say, this is something that I want to do in the next couple of years. What do I need?
Hmm.
How can I get there? Can I take money out from my existing home? Do I have to save it? What do I need to do? But take the steps to start,
Yeah, ask the questions. No harm in asking questions.
yeah, and make a move. And people are afraid to make moves now. Just like make the move to get going, you know? Take a chance. It's the only way, I'd say.
All right,
Yeah.
sounds good.
All right. Anything else on that?
No, that's good.
No, we'll just go and yeah,
Cocoon, hibernate
hibernate.
for another month.
Yeah, or more. Okay, so that's it. Hopefully, if you want, we first of all, we did a seminar about this some time ago. I'd be happy to share that with
That's a good
you.
idea.
Yeah, so
Hmm.
if you want to get more information about buying an investment property, I've got a great little
Yeah,
presentation
that
for
was
you that
great.
we
Well
did.
received. So I think people got a lot
I
out of
think
it. That's a
so.
good
Yeah,
idea.
yeah. And in the meantime, like, just reach out anytime you have questions because we can help you through it. No matter where it is that you want to buy or what you're thinking, we'll definitely be able to help you. Make the important decisions. And that's it. Make sure you're following us on all of our social channels at the Janelle Cameron team, and please make sure you rate this podcast, like it, and leave a comment. And we really appreciate it. And have a great week and happy real estate.
Happy real estate, everyone.